Hello there. My name is Ashley Carter. I'm a professor in the management division. I teach topics in leadership and compassion. And I want us to pause and ask some pretty big questions. One is, how do we inspire change in ourselves, in others, in our communities, in our world? And how can we better connect with one another? How can we better show up for one another? And these questions I've been sitting with recently, and I'll have to admit there really aren't any easy answers. And that's the thing about change. Even when we really want it, it still requires us to step into that next place where we don't have all the answers. And so, how do we manage that gap? Moving from what we know, what's familiar, to the possibility of what could be. Now, there are many ways to think about this, but I'm going to suggest something a little bit different. It's not a fancy strategy or a system, but it's actually something much more human, and that's story. Actually, the stories that we tell can help us cross that gap, right? Move from here to there. And today I'm going to talk about two types of stories. The first type of story has to do with what we tell others about who we are, where we come from, and the experiences that shape how we show up today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about mine. So, like all of us, I come from a childhood story of imperfect love, just meaning I come from two imperfect humans who did their very best to love me in the ways that they knew how. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia. It's a suburb of Atlanta, and my dad was a minister and sometimes an entrepreneur, and often he would take on odd jobs to help us make ends meet. And my mom, she mostly stayed at home to support his endeavors until she decided to go back to school, to finish college, and to become an elementary school teacher. And growing up, we didn't have much in terms of money, and so we harnessed creativity to have a sense of freedom and play. Now, for me, I found the company of stories to be wonderful. They allowed me to explore new worlds, and they also gave me a little bit of escape when the pressures of being poor felt really painful and unfair. Now, after sort of growing up a little bit, it was only until I went to college that stories and narrative became a little bit something more than just escaping my reality. When I started college, I went to Stanford and I had a really hard time during my first year. I struggled to find a sense of belonging and place in, a location that felt really far from home in a lot of ways. And I remember that time, each night, I would bike back to my dorm, and I would sit in my room alone, and I would scheme on how I was going to drop out and how I was going to tell my parents. And luckily, I received an intervention instead in one of my courses. It was a mindset intervention. It was really simple, but it was very powerful. First-year students read the stories of upperclassmen. And in those stories, they describe their transition to college, the setbacks that they were experiencing, as normal and temporary. And at-risk students, empowered with that new story, actually made different choices. They sought out new strategies, new resources, and that really helped their well-being and their achievement. In my case, I didn't drop out, but instead I sought out community and support. And with a lot of trial and error, I eventually began to find my own footing. Now, with a little bit of space to look back on that time, it really dawned on me the impact, really the magnitude of change that that experience had in my life. And it really formed my ultimate aspiration, my North Star. And that's to plant seeds of hope and practical wisdom to inspire growth in others. That's because insights from psychology, I realized, could provide tools that could radically alter a life for the better. And I found others who shared that vision. Here I am, the newest member of the Psychology 1 teaching team in my sophomore year in college. It's really important that we tell our stories and that we listen to the stories of others. Looking back actually sheds a lot of light on our values. It gives us a lot of information about the work that we are uniquely positioned to embark upon. And also looking back can give us powerful context to how we look ahead to the future. Even now, when you close your eyes and you imagine a better world, what do you see? What particular problems are you inspired to tackle? What gifts and talents do you want to lend to that cause? Sharing our stories, it doesn't just illuminate our past, it gives us great information on what we feel called to do. And it can invite others to join us in that work. But also sharing parts of our journey can also really expand how we think about community in general. And I learned this firsthand in some work that I was doing when I was a graduate student during my PhD process, doing research. And I did this work with my late graduate advisor, Kathy Phillips, who I was just so blessed to know and to learn from. And we were interested in something in particular. We wanted to know, when people from different backgrounds, when they come together, how might they get to know one another? What strategies could they use? And really, did it matter how they approached that task? And what we found was quite striking. We found that when people shared their unique stories, when they shared ways in which they might be different and not just similar to one another, when they touched on details of their early lives, not just their credentials or their accolades, but the personal stuff, where they grew up, how they grew up, right? The experiences that shaped them. Not only did they feel more connected, but later on, when those same people were working together to solve problems in their community, they had an expanded view. They considered more perspectives. They acknowledged more stakeholder voices. So in this way, it is very powerful to share our stories with others and to make space to listen to those stories as well. Now, I want to talk about a different type of story. And this story is harder to spot. That's because it lives within us. So let me just give you the ABCs really quickly. There are activating events. When I say activating, I mean it activates a reaction within you. And often it's something that we feel in our body. It can feel like a sucker punch to the gut, or like the floor has fallen beneath our feet, right? So we have an activating event. Maybe it's some critical feedback. Maybe it's being passed over for something that you really wanted. There are all sorts of activating events that we experience in life. And typically, when we have that activating event, we skip straight to the consequences, how we respond, the strategies and the resources that we deploy to tackle the challenge. But there's actually something that sits between activating events and their consequences. And that is our beliefs, the stories that we tell ourselves about what's going on. And often, we can be aided by telling a different story. Rather than the current setbacks that I'm experiencing show me that I can't do it, that we can't do it, we can maybe tell a different story. We might say instead, in fact, our current strategies aren't working. What could we try instead? Now, in order to tell a different story, you need to know what's the current story. But stories like to hide, and it's not often easy to articulate the assumptions that are driving what we do and how we're seeing a given situation. So rather than asking what is the story, a better question is often who. Who is telling the story? I'm going to offer up a common narrator of our stories, and that's the jackal. Whoa, yeah. The jackal is a predator, and the jackal is on the hunt. Jackals have those piercing eyes, the large ears, and that's because they are hyper-vigilant to danger. Now, if you were to Google about jackals. Turns out jackals are quite vocal. This is what Google told me. They utilize a range of yips, howls, and screams to communicate with their family members and to defend their territory boundaries. So when you think about your inner jackal, think about them as maybe your well-meaning, but maybe overprotective friend. Their job is to scan for danger and to protect you. Now, my inner jackal often takes the voice of my grandmother. She's really sweet, and she cares about me a lot, and she's very fierce. She's looking for danger, and my inner jackal loves to catastrophize. Any sort of sign that there might be a challenge or something unexpected, my jackal gets really loud and says, "Oh Lord," like my grandma might say, braces itself, and then lists out all of the horrors that lie in wait. Maybe your jackal sounds like that, or maybe your jackal likes to engage in that all or nothing thinking. Things are all good or all bad. You're either a perfect leader or you are a complete failure. Whatever your jackal looks and sounds like, if you can imagine it, then you can negotiate with that voice, right? You can say, "Oh my gosh, thank you." When your jackal gets super loud, "Thanks for looking out for me." But what evidence do I have to support that claim? Is there a different way of looking at this? And by doing so, you activate a different voice. And that's the one of your giraffe. The giraffe tells a different story. Giraffes are gentle, peaceful creatures. They have really large hearts, and those long necks allow them to zoom out to see the bigger picture, to offer more nuance and context in an accurate way. Think about your inner giraffe as your wisest, kindest friend. Maybe someone that doesn't have all the answers, but they offer a new insight. They might suggest a new strategy or resource, even if they have the solutions. My inner giraffe sounds a lot like Bob Ross, keeping an eye to the landscape and allowing for happy mistakes. If we can get more familiar with who is telling the story, then we can tell a different one when we're activated. The next time you're activated, you might say and pause, "Wait a second, who's telling the story? Who's in the driver's seat right now? Is this story serving me? Is it supportive?" My invitation for you today, right, to really get curious about the stories that we tell, to tell your stories honestly, and to tell a different story if you need to. If more of us can do that, it's a quiet thing, but it's a courageous thing. We can not only change ourselves, but we can change what's possible together. Thank you.
Thank you.